The wind rolled over the main coastline like a restless ghost, pulling at the broken boards of the old dock, where Elena Ward worked each morning, her hands rough from salt and memory, the air thick with the tang of metal and seaweed she moved with. The quiet precision of someone who had long ago learned to measure each motion, each breath, each thought she had left behind the world of commands and gunfire and shadows, but it had never truly left her. It lingered in her spine in the way she scanned reflections in the water and noticed how footsteps echoed behind her, even when there were none. The townspeople saw her as the quiet woman by the docks, fixing boats and engines for cash, never smiling much, never talking unless necessary. They thought her mysterious, maybe broken, maybe dangerous, but they did not know her name, carried a weight, known only in certain corridors of the Navy. Her record sealed her past, spoken of only in fragments when old colleagues toasted the fallen, and the forgotten. She had walked away from that life, but the ocean always whispered it back. The morning the trouble began, the town was still half asleep, the gulls shrieking above the empty harbor. Elena tightened a bolt on the hull of a fishing trawler, when a truck rumbled by, 3 men inside, laughing too loud for the hour. Their words carried on the cold air, rough and careless. They had been working the new construction site near the highway. Strangers in a town that liked to know everyone. Elena glanced up just long enough to see one of them looking back, his grin slow and assessing. She lowered her gaze, kept working her hands steady, but her mind already noting the license plate, the missing rearview mirror, the way he tapped the door. Twice, before they turned the corner at the rusty Anchor Bar that night, the same men returned, drunk and bold, their laughter scraping against the low hum of the jukebox. The waitress, a thin young woman with tired eyes, tried to brush off their comments, but one of them caught her wrist. Elena sat at the counter sipping black coffee, her reflection flickering in the mirror behind the bar. She stood without hurry, walked over, and spoke low enough that only they could hear something in her tone made. The biggest one, "Release the girl." He stared at Elena, and for a moment confusion crossed his face, because she did not look afraid. She simply looked like someone measuring a distance between here and regret. They backed off eventually, muttering insults. As they left and the bar exhaled a collective relief, the waitress thanked her. Elena only nodded, paid her tab, and walked into the fog that wrapped the street like wet cloth. She thought it was done. But as she reached her truck, she noticed the scratch. Along the driver's door, shallow but deliberate, a message written not in words but in intent. She ran a hand over the metal, then looked toward the dark lot where the construction trucks were parked. Her breath slow, her expression unreadable. She drove home without lights until the last turn near her cabin. That night, she dreamt of waves crashing against steel, of orders shouted through static, of a hand slipping away into black water. She woke before dawn, heart steady, eyes open, listening. She could tell by the stillness outside that the world was not as empty as it seemed. She moved silently across the wooden floor to the window. The fog clung thick to the trees, but there was something darker beyond it. Movement? Maybe not. She waited until the first light broke the horizon before stepping outside. The next day at the docks, the same truck rolled by again, slower. This time, the men inside watching her, she ignored them, bent to lift a toolbox. Her muscles coiled, her mind calculating. Every possible path, every sound, every angle. She had learned to live small, to let the days drift like tidewater. But she could feel the old rhythm waking inside her, the one that counted exits and wind direction and weight distribution without thought. She told herself to let it go, that these were just men who wanted attention. Not a fight, but instinct was older than reason. By evening, the sky turned heavy with rain, the gulls gone, the sea restless. She locked up the shop, checked each latch twice. Before walking the narrow path toward her cabin 1/2 mile through the woods, she could smell the storm and the faint trace of cigarette smoke that did not belong. She paused, listened the rain tapping leaves above her. She knew the sound of patience, and this was it. someone waiting. She walked on slower now, her boots quiet on the wet earth, her breath shallow, her hand near the small knife she carried for cutting rope. She reached the clearing, her cabin dark except for the weak glow from inside. A light she had not left on, she crouched low, scanning the perimeter. The tracks in the mud fresh, the door slightly ajar. She moved closer step by step, her mind stripping away the layers of the scene. No panic, only procedure. She reached the porch, heard the faint creak from inside and the muffled laughter of men who thought they were unseen. She pushed the door gently open, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior, the smell of wet boots, beer, and arrogance. 3 shadows inside rummaging through. Her things, one lifted her framed photo from the shelf, studying it before tossing it aside. She could hear their words low and cruel, talking about the woman from the bar, about teaching lessons, about how she would learn respect. She stepped forward, then stopped the floorboard beneath her foot, whispering just enough for the nearest man to turn his head. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and she saw recognition dawn, not of who she was, but of what she was. And in that instant, the air between them shifted, like the silence before a storm. He reached for something, maybe a weapon, maybe courage. But she was already moving, her hand closing around the door frame. Her muscles tightening, her breath held, and the old world rushing back to meet her. The world she had buried beneath layers of normalcy and quiet. The world that did not hesitate and did not forgive. And in that breathless space between his movement and hers, the storm finally broke outside, lightning slicing through the dark, and the sound of thunder folding over itself as the first strike landed unseen, and then the lights went out. Darkness folded around the room like a living thing, swallowing the light and leaving only the sound of rain and breath. The men froze their bravado, thinning into confusion as the sudden night closed in. One cursed, another laughed, but it was a brittle sound. Elena moved in silence, the way she had been taught to move through flooded corridors and enemy compounds where sound meant death. She shifted, her weight, her boots finding memory in the floorboards. She could smell the fear before they even realized it was theirs. The first man fumbled for a flashlight somewhere in his jacket. The beam never came because Elena was already beside him, one hand pressing his wrist, another guiding his body down in a twist that made no sound, only the soft thud of air leaving lungs. He crumpled. She caught him before he fell too loud, lowering him to the ground, the others still whispering harsh questions. Across the dark, she took 3 steps left, melted into shadow, and waited for their next mistake. A flash of lightning gave her a picture in white, the second man near the window, the third by the kitchen counter gripping a crowbar. She could read there. Panic in the angles of their shoulders. They thought she was hiding, that she was afraid that they could find her and end this. She let them believe it because control was the quietest weapon she ever learned to use. The storm outside roared, drowning. The small noises inside until everything felt suspended between seconds. Then a crash. As the second man kicked over a chair, his voice sharp, calling for his friend, the one already unconscious. Elena moved through the gap, like wind, her hand catching. His arm spinning him forward, his own weight betraying him as he slammed into the wall. She whispered a single word, not to taunt, but to anchor herself. Breathe. The third man shouted her name, though he had never been told it. His voice, shaking, demanded she stop, that they only wanted to scare her, that it had gone too far, but lies taste different when you are close enough to feel them. She turned her head toward the sound. His shadow moved, and she waited the pause of a predator. Not cruel, only certain. The crowbar swung wide, a dull gleam in the darkness. She stepped aside, caught his wrist, felt the shock of impact travel through bone. She used his momentum, a dance of physics and muscle, sending him across the room where he landed hard, the air exploding out of him. The silence after louder than thunder outside the cabin. The rain eased into a whisper. Elena stood still for a long moment, letting her breathing slow, listening for more movement. There was none. Only the quiet sound of rain dripping through the eaves and the muffled groans of men who would remember this night with confusion, more than pain. She did not want to kill them. She did not even want to hurt them. But instinct was older than mercy, and mercy had to be chosen. She found the flashlight, flicked it on its pale cone, revealing faces twisted in fear and disbelief. They saw her clearly for the first time, not just a woman, not just a stranger, but something disciplined. Honed the lines of her face unreadable, her eyes cold, not from hate but from memory. She told them to leave her house, her voice calm enough to be terrifying. They stumbled toward the door, dragging one another through the mud and into the storm, muttering promises she did not listen to. She waited until their truck engine started sputtered and disappeared into the distance before she let the light fall from her hand, the battery rolling away across the floor. For a moment she felt the old tremor rise beneath her ribs, the one that came. After a mission, when silence felt too heavy and the adrenaline had nowhere to go, she walked outside into the rain, tilted her head back and let it wash over her. She could taste metal on her, tongue the smell of ozone clinging to the night. She wanted to believe it was finished, that they would leave her alone, that the ghosts had been buried again. But something in the way the thunder moved across the bay told her the story was not done. Not yet at dawn. The sheriff arrived, an old friend of her father, his hat dripping with rain. He had seen the broken lock, the overturned chairs, the bruises on the men who now sat in his car, silent and shivering. He asked Elena what happened. She told him pieces enough for the law, but not enough for the truth. He studied her face the way a man studies weather, deciding if it means storm or calm, then nodded, saying he would handle it. She thanked him quietly, but her eyes kept drifting to the horizon, where the fog still clung to the water. That evening she found a folded note under the wiper of her truck written in thick marker. 3 words, "We are not done." She read it once, then twice before slipping it into her pocket. The air around her seemed thinner. She could hear distant laughter from the harbor, where the same men had been seen drinking again, released on bail, already talking louder than sense. She closed the shop early, locked the door, and sat by the window watching the sun sink into a sky the color of steel. Her hands still for once, her mind anything but. She replayed every detail of the night in her head, the way she used to debrief after an operation. Nothing out of place, everything accounted for except the question of why. They would come back, maybe pride, maybe orders, maybe something else. There was always something else. She checked her phone, saw no messages, but an old number from a restricted line had called twice with no voicemail. She stared at it long enough to feel the past lean closer, whispering names she had not spoken in years. She deleted the call history, but her pulse did not slow. When darkness fell again, she sat outside her cabin, the wind calmer now, but the woods behind her felt awake. She had left the lights off on purpose, the moon casting enough glow for shadows to breathe. She heard a distant engine, then quiet, then footsteps on gravel. Soft, deliberate, not drunk. This time not clumsy. These were different. She rose slowly, her body remembering, drills her heartbeat measured. She waited until the first shape appeared at the edge of the trees, and saw the gleam of something metallic in his hand. Elena stepped back into the doorway, her mind already drawing routes through the house exit's obstacles. Weapons within reach, she could feel the seconds stretching the night, holding its breath. She had not wanted this. She had wanted silence, peace, a place to forget. But the world never let go of those it had trained to fight. She watched the shadow move closer. Another shape behind it. 2, maybe 3. The air tasted of coming violence. She thought of the sea and the endless rhythm of the waves and how every tide brings back what the shore tries to bury. The first figure stopped at the porch, his voice low, saying her name correctly this time, not with mockery but with intent. And she knew before he spoke again that this was not one of the same men. This was someone who knew exactly who she was and what she had done, and that whatever had begun at that bar had just become something else entirely. Something that reached farther than a small-town grudge. The rain began again, soft at first, then harder, as if to drown the sound of his next words, and what he said made her blood turn cold. The words hung in the air like smoke curling from a fire that refused to die. Elena felt the chill of them before the meaning fully settled. Her hand hovered near the knife at her hip, her breath steady as if every inhale could anchor the storm. Inside her, the figure stepped closer, the shadow stretching across the porch, making the wet wood gleam under the moonlight. The rain drumming on the roof masking the soft scrape of boots on boards, the night alive with anticipation she could feel. The pulse of it vibrating against her bones. He spoke again, his tone calm, controlled, almost too calm for what he carried in his eyes. A recognition that frightened even those who had seen death. She did not move her gaze, sharp as steel, scanning the trees, the yard, the edges of the cabin, for anything that might give him advantage, but it was him. She watched her mind ticking through scenarios, routes, exits, positions, strike points, her body remembering the old patterns that had been drilled in. Years of training where hesitation equals failure. Behind him, movement flickered, shadows within shadows. Another shape revealed itself, crouched low, ready to strike, yet waiting for the signal. She counted 3, 2, 1. A flash of reflection, a glint of metal in the rain. And she stepped back. The first man lunged. She sidestepped the arc of his arm, the knife clattering across the wet porch. She grabbed his wrist, twisted his elbow in a motion that would make the strongest man cry out his own, weight taking him down into the mud. She did not strike beyond control, the instinct older than fury, keeping her precise calm. The second shadow moved faster than thought, slipping past the railing toward the side of the cabin. Elena pivoted, spinning into action, catching him by the shoulder and using his momentum to throw him against the siding. The impact loud enough to rattle her teeth. She pressed her advantage, heart-steady muscles coiled, waiting for the next move while the first man groaned. On the ground, eyes wide in disbelief at the calm that held her still. And watching, not a second wasted, not a word spoken. Only the sound of rain and distant thunder marking the rhythm of the fight. Suddenly, the third figure appeared at the edge of the porch, almost invisible in the dark, almost too late. She saw the gleam of a pistol in his hand, and time slowed, the old training kicking in. Assessing angles, distance, wind, and gravity. In a heartbeat, she lunged forward, the figure startled, firing. Once the shot missing wide enough to tear a board from the railing, Elena moved like water flowing around rocks, catching his wrist before he could raise the weapon again, twisting it downward, letting him stumble forward onto the porch floor. All three of them now pinned or staggered or scrambling. Elena felt the old adrenaline surge, not blind rage but clarity. The calm of someone who has seen chaos and knows every beat, every microsecond counts. She could have ended it here, finished it with one motion, but she did not. Her eyes swept the cabin, the yard, the shadows beyond, knowing this was more than a random attack. This was knowledge. This was intent. This was someone who wanted to draw her back into the world she had left behind. Then, she saw the message carved into the side of the cabin, one she had missed before wet wood smeared with rain, and anger letters jagged and hurried, a single line, but enough to chill her. The words meant they had planned this before they even came. Tonight planned for her, knowing where she lived and how she moved, and that they underestimated her until the wrong second. The wind carried it all the way through the trees, echoing through the bay, and the first man on the ground whispered her name through clenched teeth like a prayer she could barely hear. She backed away slowly toward the door, listening for any more movement. The night seemed to stretch its muscles, waiting for the next strike. She could feel the storm in the clouds above, matching the storm inside her, every nerve alive, her heart steady yet fierce, the men slowly picking themselves up, their fear obvious. Now, the arrogance long gone, replaced with the knowledge that this was not a woman to be trifled with, each of them, measuring their chances and finding none sufficient. From behind the trees, another shadow detached itself, moving silently toward the porch. She turned slightly instinct, pulling her eyes toward it, the shape stopping half visible in the moonlight. Not attacking, but watching, assessing. She felt it in her chest, the same pulse she had felt years ago in foreign lands, the knowledge of someone who understands the rules of combat and chaos without needing to speak of them. A presence both threatening and familiar. And she realized she was not dealing with amateurs, not with the drunk men from the bar, but with someone trained enough to challenge even her. She tightened her grip on the knife at her hip and stepped back into the cabin, her mind already mapping exits, windows, doors, furniture, each object, a potential shield, a weapon, a distraction. The rain increased, hitting the roof like drumbeats of war, the storm outside matching the storm inside the room, matching the storm in her own veins. The three men still outside, their movements, hesitant, slow, calculating, and she could feel every second stretching into eternity, knowing this night was far from over. And then the shadow from the trees stepped forward, the figure fully revealed. The face half hidden under a hood, familiar enough to make her stomach tighten, a name from the past, whispered through the storm, through the rain, through the memories she had tried to bury, a memory that should have stayed buried, but now stood in. Her doorway in the rain seemed to freeze in the air as her mind calculated whether to strike first or wait for the inevitable move that would decide everything. Her lips parted to speak, but no sound came. The air charged the men outside, frozen. The new shadow still waiting, the storm above swelling the bay, restless, the cabin itself seeming to hold its breath. And she knew this night would not end without a choice, without a move, without the answer to the question she had never wanted to face again. And then the hood fell back, revealing the eyes she had hoped never to see again. She moved through the fog, her boots silent on the wet ground, every nerve alert, the shadows shifting around her like living things, the rain fading but the chill lingering in her bones. She sensed movement behind the trees, a whisper of wind, a flicker of shape, her hand tightening on the knife. She did not flinch, she did not hesitate. She had survived every storm, every ambush.